All right. So again, welcome to the room. Welcome to the room. And so tonight we're going to be talking about from busyness to burnout. Okay, from busyness to burnout. So again, my name is Janice, and we have about 1 minute to go before we get started. And once we kind of make certain that everything is good to go, we will begin just going through our conversation in regards to making certain that we do not become, you know, burned out from being overly busy. So, my name is Janice. I am the owner of Hills Leadership and Training Institute, where I provide training at the corporate level for various businesses, both private, public, and for nonprofit. And tonight we are going to be talking about our increasing need to always have something to do. And I know I can't be the only one, right? I mean, it's becoming increasingly difficult to really find those moments when you are just in a real relaxed state where you're not necessarily thinking about the next thing that you are required or that you have to do. With that, of course, comes that constant state of anxiety and that constant state of like unrest, and that, of course, is what we experience when we begin to think about, you know, overwhelm and being burned out. The great part about this particular room tonight is that if you are not present in the live event, which is okay, we will have this available for replay so that you are able to still hear the actual conversation that we're having. Um, so the purpose of this room really is just to discuss some of the causes of burnout, is to discuss some of the strategies for coping with burnout, as well as thinking about some of the preventive type activities or behavior that we could exhibit in order to ensure that we do not become one of those individuals who is in the midst of dealing with a traumatic experience, just being completely overwhelmed and not really having a good way of figuring out what to do next. When we think about busyness, right, it's more than just, our body being in motion, right? It's more than just us having, this huge to-do list and we're moving from, one activity to the other. It really does take a toll on our mental health, right? It takes a toll on our physical health because we're not able to fully find ourselves at rest. And so when we are constantly in the state of, either preparing to be, doing something, or when we are actually, in the midst of it, there's going to be, that whole entire time frame where, yeah, we may be present for that moment, but we're probably already thinking about, what are some of the other things that we're going to need to do. So some of the things that, definitely causes a concern in terms of, thinking about potential areas to eliminate when we are dealing with large amounts of stress. Um, One of the areas that we know for certain is always going to be our personal life, in determining whether or not we have a good balance with all of those things that are happening there, right? Especially when you start adding layers in your personal life, right? And what I mean by layers is that, if you're single, then you really have maybe a single layer in the personal life outside of your parents, maybe siblings, and then, of course, your extended family. When you're married, you have maybe, two layers of yourself, and then, of course, your spouse. But then when you begin to expand that family and you begin to have children, then there is another layer that is coming into play, because they're going to have their own needs and their own requirements that you are, of course, going to be attentive to. And so that in of itself begin to produce those additional activities that can and does sometimes, lead to us being a little overwhelmed. So some of the areas or some of the causes of burnout is, of course, when we're looking at our work life, right, and being overworked. Now, I know from experience that when you're working in the corporate arena, it's so easy for you to constantly say, yes, I could do that, right? And, and when you do it really well, people expect you to just kind of keep on doing it over and over again, right? And you began to experience that sense of all consuming, where it's always feel like you're constantly having to either work on a project, or you are in the midst or beginning to work on a project, or you just finished working on a project, and you never really have any kind of boundaries that are set around your availability. Because as a corporate individual, as a person who especially who feels as if they can kind of take on a lot and be okay, we don't understand that it's absolutely acceptable to let people know that you are overwhelmed, right? That you are not able to accept another project, that you're not able to, provide additional assistance, right? Because what ends up happening is that, yeah, something is going to suffer, and chances are you're not going to let that project suffer. You're not going to let those items that you are responsible for suffer. So that means you're going to be the one who is going on little to no sleep. That means that you're going to be the one who is sacrificing hours, at the work and on the weekend. And if you never really set the boundaries to say, I deserve to have space to decompress, then you, of course, are going to continue to feel that sense of being overwhelmed. Some of the other things that go along with that is having unrealistic expectations. And we all sometimes are, guilty of actually having unrealistic expectations. I remember listening to a speaker once, and they were saying how, a lot of marriages, they get in trouble because of finances and, communication, but a majority of them are really centered around, or the underlying reasons are because of unrealistic expectation. No one took the time to manage the expectation of the other partner. And so we want to make certain that we are setting realistic expectations in all areas of our life, whether it's our personal life, our life where we have in terms of professional or work, but that in every area that we are in, right, that we are actually setting those boundaries so that we are not allowing ourselves to be stretched too thin. Some of the other things is making certain that, we share our different perspectives and insight on how the factors that we talked about previously is affecting us, and that we keep it in context, right? That we make certain that, when we are at work, that we're really addressing those issues that are work centric, and that when we're home in our personal lives or in our relationships, that we are really addressing those issues that are the center of those relationships. And we know that we're the same people, right? We're the same people whether we're at home or we're at work. And what I mean by that is we are going to carry, whatever kind of stressors we are dealing with into either of those areas. And so we want to make certain that we are having a good perception or perspective, I should say, on how or what is actually going on. Right? Because when we are dealing with extra stressors in our personal life, that person who it was just right there on the verge of, almost getting on your nerves at work, it's going to tip the scale and you're going to barely be able to handle a conversation with them, right? So we want to make certain that we're keeping our perspective in place and insight into how we are dealing with those various issues that may come up. Also, we want to make certain that we are, identifying specific issues or causes of potential burnout, right? And like I mentioned, a lot of times the burnout is going to come from us simply, not setting boundaries and having unrealistic expectations, both placed on us and also the ones that we place on ourselves. So when we're thinking about, how can I, begin to deal with or cope with those stressors so that I'm not a victim of being in a situation where now I am burned out or I am not able to fully function because I'm so tired or I'm just don't have the motivation or the energy, right? That how can I begin to, make certain that that is not going to be, what I'm going to eventually end up, looking like. And so some of the things that, we want to do is we want to make certain that we are prioritizing every single activity in our lives, especially the very large ones, right? Because we want to make sure that we are not over committing, meaning that there should be other people involved in the conversation about what needs to take place before you agree, right? So we want to make certain that we are essentially not overcommitting and that we're prioritizing those situations and things that kind of come up in our daily life. The other thing is we want to make certain that we delegate. Delegation is okay. You really do not have to do every single thing. Excuse me. Hold on just 1 second. I'm sorry. You do not have to do every single thing. That there are people who can and generally will help you accomplish or complete certain activities or tasks. So making certain that we understand, what we need to keep and what we can delegate. And then, of course, self-care. Self-care is so important. Okay, it is important. You do not want to, skip on your self-care. And when I talk about self-care in the checklist that's available for you to download, if you did not have a chance to come to the actual live event, it's still available inside of the comments area underneath the actual event itself. But inside the self-care checklist is 4 areas that you want to kind of keep in mind. You want to keep in mind your actual mental well-being, right? That is also going to take care of some of the emotional things. You want to make certain that you're, keeping in mind those parameters around your social, those parameters around your body, and those parameters around your career. And in the checklist, it gives you a couple of areas that will kind of jog your intentions, if you will, right? Things that you need to kind of keep in mind in terms of self-care and making certain that you are presenting the best you by taking care of these things. But in the checklist, it gives you this really great memory jogger to, hey, don't forget about this. And you can look at it every single day, right? You could put it somewhere where, when you wake up in the morning, it's there. You could put the checklist somewhere when you go to bed at night, it's there. When you're at work, it's there. And it just a really quick visual of, what, I'm important. And as I'm making this to-do list, I need to be on it. And preferably you need to be at the top. Okay, because if you are not well, if you do not have the energy and the time and of course the mental and emotional capacity to take care of yourself, then you will not be of any good to anyone else. And that's personal or work or professional, if you will. So we want to remember to ensure that we have moments where we are fully dedicated to our own self-care. And then, of course, when we're thinking about these strategies, right, we don't want to just, put them in a singular box, because we're all different. We all have, different areas and different layers inside of our own personal, relationships, and of course, inside of our work relationships. So we want to make certain that we're containing and placing them in the right context, right? And each of us is going to have different coping mechanisms. Some of us may become, very withdrawn. Others may decide to go to the gym. Some may begin to overeat. So you need to be very aware of when you begin to start acting in a way that is not normally how you behave, right? If you are a person who is normally looking and waiting and can't, wait to get into the gym, or at least perform some type of physical activity, but now all of a sudden it's 6 months later, you haven't worked out at all, not once, that may be an indicator that there is something more going on, that you may be experiencing some signs of burnout, because you're not even able to place into your existence some of those things that you really enjoy, right? We want to make certain that we are incorporating our childhood or our childlike behavior into our life, right? And that means that where we have an unexpected, expectation for this amazing thing to happen, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything that can happen that very moment, but you want to have a spirit or air of expectancy where you believe that the impossible can take place, right? And that is that childlike type mentality and behavior that you want to hold on to, because what it's going to give you is a sense of peace and calm, because you know that you can persevere through all of these things that's going on. Okay, so let's talk about prevention and sustainability. And we're at about 21 minutes. So I really don't want to go over 30 minutes in this particular broadcast, especially if you're going to be listening to this on replay. I want it to be something that you can get really quickly, and then, of course, move on. So in the prevention and sustainability, right, we want to make sure that we talk about ways of preventing burnout, right? And what we mentioned earlier, of course, was making certain that we prioritize ourselves as well as all of the other things we're responsible for, with us being at the top of the list. We want to make certain that we look for ways in which we can share the load, right? That we can share the responsibilities that we normally have, and that's through delegation. So you want to look around and you want to be able to delegate, right? You want to make sure that you are very intentional about your self-care. Okay, and your self-care could mean you are saying no to a lot more things, right? And that you are not placing yourself beneath, right, the expectations or the importance of everyone else. Everybody else can't be important all the time. You have to be your number one priority at some point. Okay, so we want to make certain that we are keeping in mind our self-care. And then, of course, we want to make certain that we are balancing productivity and rest. If we do not have adequate amounts of rest, then we are going to essentially wear ourselves out. And that's where a lot of the burnout comes from, right? Because we got just enough energy to keep going. We just need to do this for a little bit longer. We just need to do this for a little bit longer. And the next thing you know, we're somewhere laid up because we don't have any more reserves left in us. We are totally depleted. And so we want to make certain that we are taking care of our physical health and our mental health, but we also want to make certain we're doing this through rest, right? Through rest. So some of the areas that I want to talk about in terms of burnout prevention, and this is going to be also inside of the checklist. So the checklist that you're going to get is going to be a two-part checklist. The first part is going to be for self self-care. It's going to be a self-care checklist, and it'll be memory joggers to help you kind of remember those things that are important to kind of to keep in mind for self-care. The second checklist is going to be about burnout prevention. And the burnout prevention checklist is going to be about strategies that you can use to essentially not, experience burnout. And so these are going to be some of the things that we want to kind of keep in mind. This is one of the things that we mentioned earlier, which is you definitely want to set boundaries. You want to make certain that you are managing your stress. You want to make certain that you are prioritizing rest. And then, of course, you want to make certain that you practice mindfulness, right? And mindfulness really is all about meditation and making certain that you are, having a moment to kind of reset yourself, right? Reset your mind and reset your intentions. And so we want to make certain that we have a way to promote a method for us to actually relax. If we don't relax, then of course that's going to put pressure on us to perform, and of course it leads to what we're trying to prevent in this conversation, which is of course burnout. We know we have societal pressures, we have societal norms where we feel like we can just do it all, right? That we can do everything. And I don't believe that there's one person that absolutely cannot do it all. I believe that there are certain, abilities that's within us that will allow for us to be able to, be all of those things which are important to you. However, it all comes back to balance, right? Anytime we are out of balance in any of those areas that we find or hold as important, what it's going to cause is it's going to cause us to, of course, begin to overcompensate because we begin to feel guilty by us not being able to allocate the same amount of time as we do in that one area that we currently are focusing on. And that in and of itself is going to cause other issues that is going to begin to show up, in our bodies with tension in our neck, headaches, right? Sometimes the ability not to even really be able to function. And so we want to make certain that as we're thinking about, ways to prevent burnout, that we're thinking about it in a whole, person kind of mindset, that we're not thinking about it from just one angle. Because if you are thinking about it from one angle, then we're already, starting this thing off on the wrong foot. So we want to make certain that, we take into account a couple of different things, right? We want to make certain, and this is going to go ahead and just kind of close us out for this evening. And again, thank you so much for showing up in the room tonight. I really appreciate you taking your time out. I know it's late, so I really appreciate you taking the time out to be here. And for those of you who are catching this on the replay, definitely make certain that you go and download the checklist, which is going to also be available inside of the comments that's underneath the actual event itself. So we talked about making certain that we understand what are some of the causes for burnout, right? So some of the causes for burnout is, of course, going to be work related, maybe having too much on our plate at one time, us not being able to set proper boundaries, and then of course us having unrealistic expectations. And all of this is going to lead to us overcompensating because we are beginning to try to catch or ensure that there is not any kind of lack anywhere. Well, some of the strategies that we are looking for in terms of making certain that we can help combat some of the burnout or the syndrome of burnout is by prioritizing ourselves, right? And managing the burnout, and what I mean by that is making certain that we are aware of those changes that are taking place, and that we do not, just try to say, well, it's only for a little while or to overlook it, but we really are taking those moments and intentionally trying to figure out what is going to be our best route. We also want to make certain that when we can, that we delegate and that we keep in mind our self-care. And again, the self-care as well as the burnout prevention checklist is going to be available for you to download inside of the comments area. And those are going to be some of the things that we want to keep in mind. We are not going to ever get to a point where, we may not, ever be busy, right? But we can make certain that we manage it in a way that allows for a little bit of balance. And of course, for us to be able to prioritize ourselves and ensure that we are taking time out for self-care. And of course, developing ways and techniques to help us deal with those additional stress. And the most important thing is just to be aware of it and to make certain that once it becomes known that we are ahead of it, that we're not waiting to try to catch up with it. You know, we don't want to begin to experience any kind of emotional and or physical effects from it. And so we want to just make certain that if we have any of those areas that we talked about tonight, or if we begin to see them, that we begin to do something immediately, right? Immediately. And that is going to kind of help us get ahead of it. With that, again, my name is Janice. I am your leadership and strategist. I am the owner of Hills Leadership and Training Institute, where we are a full service training organization. We help author, coaches, and small business owners create courses, but we also offer training to the government in terms of federal, state, nonprofit, and of course, private entities. So if you are looking for training for your particular area in any of the soft skills from communication all the way down to time management, then you definitely want to go ahead and check us out at jhillstraining.com and reach out to us so that we can see how we can work together to, of course, train your biggest asset, your people. And with that, I will see you later. We will definitely have more of these events in the future. And if you're listening to me on replay, thank you so much. And follow me on all my social media accounts here on LinkedIn, Instagram, of course, Facebook, and Twitter. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.